This week on Lead One, Miserably Comfortable.
Welcome to the Lead One podcast, where our mission is to lead leaders through leadership. The goal is to get 1% better every day. Let's see what Drew and the guys have to say.
All right, guys, I got the crew back with us this week, and we are finally joined with old Sam Buck. Glad to hear your dad's doing better.
Appreciate it.
So this week, we're going to talk about the fact that most people would rather remain miserable than be uncomfortable. I'm going to say that again for the people in the back. Most people would rather remain miserable than uncomfortable. Why do you think that is?
I think people are scared of.
Or do you agree with me? I guess that's.
I absolutely agree. They'd rather complain about what's not okay than to go through the hardship of getting better at something. Because it takes some stress. You gotta, in order to build muscle, you gotta create tension. So people often don't want to do that for whatever reason, and it's short lived.
People are afraid of change, and change means you have to get uncomfortable. So better stay in your box and be miserable in your little box versus stepping outside of your box and challenging yourself to find something new or create something new.
Well, it's obviously a fear of just not knowing what's on the other side of whatever it is, So I don't know if that's xenophobia or something like that, and maybe.
Yeah,
but,
sounds good.
But yeah, I kind of try to look at the unknown as opportunity instead of just like having a fear of what can be over there. It's like an empty canvas. It's like when you're making music and it's nothing on the screen. You know what I mean? Eventually, it's going to be something there. So I kind of try to look at the unknown for myself as endless possibility of what could be, but it's still scary to a lot of people.
I think the reality is, as human nature is, we want to take the path of least resistance. And there was a couple scenarios that I thought of that I felt like proved this. One of those is we've all had a friend at some point, more than likely, who's been in what we would consider to be a miserable relationship. And I'm not necessarily talking about marriage. I'm typically talking about, before that point, I had a friend of mine in college that, there was nothing about the relationship. Either one of them seemed happy, but especially him. But it was like, but you know what? Instead of shaving and putting on some clothes and going to the bar with us on Thursday night and trying to meet somebody else, he was content with just staying with what he knew, right? Even though there was nothing, making him happy about that relationship. But I think that's why most people, there's somebody potentially listening to this podcast this morning that's driving to a job that they are absolutely miserable in, but they know what they've got. And that's why we choose to stay, because more than likely they know how to get through it. They don't like anybody they work with. Their employees their coworkers are toxic. Their boss is terrible, but they stay because they know how to get through it. And like what you just said, is that there's unknowns in the change, and it requires being getting uncomfortable to go maybe find a new career opportunity.
I think it goes even beyond that. It's about your mindset, and people they don't want to move out of whatever bracket that they're in, because they're just, like you said, Brandon, afraid of what's on the other side of that door.
I think most people do want to move, but don't move.
Well, I think that's because they lack.
It's easy to say they want to.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Yeah, you got to put some act to it. Like the whole thing, whatever anyone listening's belief is, my premise of faith is that you act on something even though you can't see the end result. And a lot of times people are comfortable being miserable is because they can't see what's on the other side of discomfort. And I think the hard part for people, especially, is to trust something that they cannot see what's really going to happen. Reasons that people stay on jobs, and they say, "Well, I know I'm going to get paid this 30,000, but if I go here, I don't know if I don't know what's going to happen." But yet you're losing out on an opportunity for that 300,000 because you're scared to move from what you already know, knowing that it's not great for you. You can't provide for your families, or you can't do this, and you feel you're upset about going to work, but yet you're unwilling to do the uncomfortable thing of stepping out on faith and trusting yourself. Is because we want the guaranteed thing.
People tend to get stuck in the planning phase. They may want to make that change, like you said, i.e., moving to another state, starting a new job, reinventing your life. All of these are things that most people would probably spend years planning, where I'd say for an entrepreneur, it's just a matter of them taking a leap of faith, right? And as an entrepreneur, we tend to just jump out there and figure it out. So we're building the bike as we're riding it. And not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. It's just who we are innately, because that's just what we do. Where other people are, well, I need to figure out how big the wheels are going to be. I need to figure out what type of chain I'm going to use. And by the time you get so lost in planning, next thing you know, you're just stuck in that one place, and it actually never happens. So
Well,
just take the leap.
Well, the deal is there's no accountability in planning. The accountability part kicks in when the action
starts,
takes place, and that's what most people. There's the fear of failure, but most people don't want that accountability. It was interesting. I sent this out to a handful of people in my contacts, just to kind of get their take. I mean, these are different ages, different demographics of people, and one of the responses that I got was that being miserable is easy, but that the uncomfortableness requires work, accountability, and self-reflection. And so once again, I think that that's why people remain there. I feel like it's almost more common today than it's ever been. And one of the things that I read was that the reason that some people choose misery is because right now we live in a victim-friendly society. And so it's easy to play like the miserable victim card, because I feel like that's more common today than it's ever been. And, Brandon, I think that kind of touches on this. That was many episodes ago, but we talked about that. And it's interesting in just some of my research, the psychology and cognitive research that's been done are kind of surrounding this topic, and that there's like a clinical diagnosis of people who are addicted to unhappiness. I mean, they choose to remain miserable. And one of the things that they talked about, the reason why getting uncomfortable is so important, is that mentally challenging tasks have the biggest impact on your brain. That mental activity builds a dense network of connections between the brain cells. But if you remain, I think oftentimes those miserable conditions don't require a lot of action, don't require a lot of activity. That's you're not challenging yourself in any way. So, hence you're not working that muscle, to your point, Sam.
I think it's almost like an alcoholic or someone who's they got to hit rock bottom before they look to make that change within themselves. And I think that it's kind of my perception is, I think it's kind of the same, where it doesn't matter how miserable you are until you've gotten to that point where you just hit that wall, and now innately in yourself you come to that point of saying, well, I think it's time that I figure out what's next in my life. But you have these, I'll give you an example. You have people who've been married 20, 30, 40 years. They absolutely hate their spouses, but they stay there. And
Right,
I always find myself saying, why? And then it's like, well, what? Like you said, they don't want to see what's on the other side.
Well, I'll disagree with you on that. And the reason that I used the example of a miserable relationship prior to marriage is I think you got a lot of people out there that believe in that vow that they made, that that's a lifelong partner. And, you know, if you're a person of faith, there's only a handful of things that can occur that would cause you to break that vow. And just at some point waking up and realizing you don't like your spouse anymore isn't one of those things. But here's to your point, though, Franz. The reason I think people remain miserable in their marriage is because to fix that problem requires you to get uncomfortable. It's not divorce. That's not the answer. It's going to counseling,
Talking about it out loud.
figuring out what is the root of the problem. And the reality is that person that's miserable is probably 50% of the problem, might even be 80 or 90, and it becomes uncomfortable to figure out that you're the person that's the problem. It's uncomfortable to go to a marriage conference and talk about what your love languages are, you know, but those are the things that fix the marriage. So
That's a good point.
Hey, so I think, excuse me, I think these people that likes to, you know, stay in misery are people that, you know, don't trust themselves, don't want to better themselves, don't know themselves. You know what I'm saying? I feel like even, you know, being an entrepreneur, you're really betting on yourself and knowing that you can accomplish whatever your goals are in your head. But if you haven't been put in that situation, I think Jim calls it a paradigm shift. You know, we hire a bunch of people here and they're like, we're 1099 or whatever, and it's mainly on you. And a lot of people come from W-2 to 1099, and it's really a paradigm shift mentally to come over to the dark side where we are.
To the light, man.
Yeah, to the light.
Depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah. But even staying in that relationship, it's the same thing. You don't think you could go out there and find somebody. You don't think you're good enough to, you know, somebody is not going to choose you. You got all these things going in your mind. So it's a lot of, I feel like, trust in yourself, trust in your ability, trust in just trust in you.
But Brandon, so what happens when that person does one of those things that you just mentioned? Like, what happens to that person? Like, what I'm saying is, like, they take that career opportunity, they go seek that person, that their lifelong partner. I mean, what happens when they accomplish that?
Oh, it's
Confidence.
yeah. You can't break them no more.
Yeah, like bingo.
It's-
I mean,
but it's
that's the thing is, like, you cross the threshold, if you will, and it's like there's
Right.
no going back, right? You
Exactly.
become a different person. We were talking yesterday evening in the office with Brennan, and he was like, "Man, like I never saw myself doing what I'm doing now," and I think it was because, like, if you know him, like it was way outside of his comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
But I'm like, and I didn't know him before this, but I just venture to say there's a different level of confidence to him now than existed 2 or 3 years ago.
And I will say this, the danger, though, however, once you reach that, is that sometimes we become less self-aware about the areas in our life in which we do not want to change. Sometimes we accomplish one particular goal, and then there's other areas of our life, because we accomplished this thing, that we neglect to get uncomfortable in. So I think it's a constant process. Like, even though you get accomplished in one area, you have to continually look for areas that you need to break the chains on.
So are you talking about, like, the person who achieves maybe
Business success.
career success,
Yeah.
but their family's in shambles?
Families in shambles, or you said, hey, this month this is my goal, and I'm going to go through the uncomfortable point of reaching this goal, but then your team suffers. Or I'm going to build up my team, but then your goals suffer. Like, it's like, okay, just always be aware, self-aware of the areas to improve. Because I always say this, the problem with someone who knows a lot is that they think they know everything. And unfortunately, when you accomplish a lot, you think that you're successful in every part of your life. The biggest part about being uncomfortable is that you have to be comfortable enough to know and recognize the areas that you got to grow in.
Sure.
And I think it's hard sometimes when you stay on the goal. Like, all of us have something we got to be uncomfortable in to get better at. Now, granted, because I'm supremely confident in this room by itself, but all of us probably have areas that we know that we probably could get better in, but we have to be willing to get uncomfortable in those areas. You know what I mean? And it may not be something that's prohibiting us from being successful in a certain place, but it may be something that's prohibiting us from growth.
Yeah, I feel like that's the principle once you cross that threshold.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And then applying that principle to every aspect
The
of your
other,
life.
right.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say, Sam. I agree with you 100%. To start there, though, seems overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
Because the reality is, most of us, we have numerous goals, numerous things we'd probably like to improve on in regards to ourselves. So if we thought about trying to get it all done, once again, could be a reason why some people choose not to act at all. But I think if you can accomplish that, in my reading, it said that if you can master like the art of being uncomfortable, that you can master just about anything, because that's how difficult it is. So if you can get uncomfortable in this one particular area, maybe it's your marriage. Now all of a sudden it's easier to do that at the office with your kids, these other aspects. But I agree with you. You got to be aware of those, but you got to start with one, right?
Yeah.
So
sometimes super focused people aren't self-aware on areas outside of their particular focus.
And I think sometimes what happens is you have that person that, because they achieve that level of success in one particular area, then they feel like that they don't have to have that focus, right? Yeah,
exactly.
It's because I'm successful in my professional life, I don't have to work on my personal self, right?
Exactly.
It's like it compensates for it.
Or starting a new career path. I mean, look at us. None of us here went to school for communications, but we're sitting here on a podcast. We're figuring it out. It may not be the number one podcast in the world, but you know what? We're not yet, but we will eventually get there. But this was a challenge. This was something new.
That's the principle. You feel me?
Starting.
It's starting and not being scared of what's on the other side of it. You know what I mean?
Never in a million years would I thought I would be sitting here doing a podcast, because I've been pigeonholed my whole life in sales, and everyone who knows me just knows that I've always been in something sales related. So for me, this is uncomfortable, stepping out into a position like this and changing the trajectory of who I am, starting something new and trying something new. But for me, I just feel like I'm just used to always finding that uncomfortable zone and trying to figure it out. Some may say that's a gift, some may say that's a curse, but that's just who I am.
I know I came into this industry. I remember sitting with Jim, like on my interview day, and I didn't go to college, so it was real hard for me to have somebody sit across from me with 5 daughters and a wife to say, "Hey, you're worth this." You know what I mean? Because I didn't go to college, didn't have that paperwork, I always put myself in position where I had to depend on me to accomplish whatever I needed to accomplish. So it's, the problem with living that way and then interviewing a W-2 person that's scared of that is being sensitive or being empathetic towards them and how they feel about the field. You know what I'm saying? So that's something I need to work on, because sometimes I'm just in that interview and I'm like, what are you scared of? I told you I had 5 daughters and a wife. You know what I'm saying?
All right, so I think in certain areas of our lives, the most uncomfortable thing to do in leadership sometimes is understand others' plight. A lot of people that we lead and a lot of people who are parallel to us that we work with don't think like we do, right? And being able to...
If everybody did, they'd all be you.
Exactly.
Right.
And being able to communicate laterally as well as, in all different directions in a way that allows you to get more understanding. They always say respond to understand and not to just respond. Listen to understand and not listen to respond. And I think sometimes when you super focus, you just don't get where people are. You just kind of listening just so you can respond and tell them why they're wrong or why they need to do this. And I think sometimes our discomfort is sitting through and listening, trying to understand where someone is. I think that for me too. I think that's also a uncomfortable place, because sometimes you can, with team members and stuff, you believe in them sometimes more than they believe in themselves, or you see the potential in them.
I was just about to say that. It's like more of I know you can do this.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? I know you're built for this.
Isn't that what a coach does?
Yeah.
And technically, if you are the leader of your team, you're the coach. They're the players, and you gotta treat them accordingly.
So I'm thinking about recruiting though. They don't know. I'm not their coach yet, but they gotta cross that threshold for me to be able to coach him. You know what I'm saying? So it's like the guy that you interviewed that didn't even come to the second interview because,
like you just said earlier, you chose the fact that you realized in order to provide the lifestyle that you wanted to for your wife and your 5 children, it was going to require you to be uncomfortable. The easy route would have been to go find the job that would have paid you just barely enough to meet your bills. And that's where, I think most people don't define that as misery, but I mean, at the same time, like, isn't that kind of what it is, right? I mean, you're never, but everybody, to your point, everybody has their role, right? So sometimes maybe you're talking to that person, you're interviewing that person that's not their role. We had this conversation last night. We were talking about you and Andrea and the roles of the household. And then I got further evidence of it last night. My in-laws had stopped by for supper, and my father-in-law is retired. And he achieved success in his career, but he said, we were talking about this topic. I wanted to get their opinion. And he said, but I was very comfortable. I stayed in my comfort zone. And for that reason, I didn't really excel, but part of that was because Carol my mother-in-law was going to be the risk taker. She's CEO of a $1 billion healthcare system, but she was the risk taker. He was the constant, the steady one. But for that reason, he didn't achieve the professional success that she did. So I'm like, it's all about risk. I mean, we've all heard it. Don't expect the reward without the risk. And growth and comfort will never coexist.
They won't. They can't.
They can't. So if you are comfortable right now in whatever it is you're doing, if you're comfortable in your workout regimen, you are not growing.
Change it.
Yeah.
And change it. And so with this, how do you, as leaders, how do you lead people out of comfort?
That's probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, that's great.
I mean, I think any leader would say that.
What's the first step?
I don't know. Ask Franz.
For me, it would be challenging them with something that they've never done before.
But how do you lead them to be able to do that? Like, how is it? Just motivation?
No, come on, man. That was the perfect time for your go-to. You got to get to know them.
You're right. Thank you. I was getting there. It's early. My brain is at half capacity. But yes, getting to know them and just
knowing their why.
Pouring into them and allowing them to I guess, not only pouring into them, but allow them to try something new. Like, give them a new task, something new to achieve, and let them know, good, bad, or indifferent, I believe in you. So even if you fail, it's okay.
Right.
I had somebody do some work on my car for me, and this new kid, he's new in the industry, and he was afraid to touch my car. He was like, your car's kind of a classic. I don't want to mess with it. It's not really used to. I said, listen to me. I am fine with you messing up. This is your opportunity to shine. This will make you better. Me pouring into him and giving him that confidence boost to go ahead and try something new that he's never tried before, and he's trying it on a vintage classic car, scared the hell out of him. But I poured into him and said, you could do it. I gave him that boost of confidence he needed, and he did it. And
to that, I think when you talk about coaching people out of comfort, out of their comfort, it has to be based on their why, not yours. I think sometimes we coach people and we know what our why is, and we give them derivatives that are based on why we think that we think their why should be, without asking them what their why is, why they do what they do, what they want to achieve, and give them something that directly helps them get there, opposed to something that we think that they should be doing. I think sometimes just knowing that, and that goes back to being comfortable with listening and communicating with people from where they are. And just knowing that, okay, if I want you to go to the next place, I got to know where you want to go.
And then I think you got to operate just a little bit outside of that, right?
Yeah, you got to push them.
Yeah,
Gotta push 'em,
so you
right.
got to cast that vision that maybe they didn't initially see for themselves.
Exactly.
I think we've all been there, though. None of us woke up one morning and said, this is what we're going to do. Someone believed in us and pushed us to get to the point where we are today, or put us in a position to do what we're doing today. And then they believed in us, i.e. your dad believed in you.
Sure.
Somebody believed in you. Somebody believed in you. Somebody believed in me and in our abilities to be entrepreneurs or to be salespeople.
I think that I kind of think of Chris and what Chris said in the meeting a few weeks ago about you guys pushing him to the next level, and how appreciative he is now, but how uncomfortable he was at that time, you know. But somebody did have to like nudge you.
Exactly.
To the
you got to
the
have
next
that
way.
person in your life, and yeah, and it's easier to take when you know that person is invested in who you are, and not just invested in what they can gain.
Yeah.
But also don't fight back. The fight back is the part, though, where you could push somebody all you want, and they're just, like they're just a mule. They don't want to
Sure,
move.
that's the person that wants to remain miserable,
Right.
to whatever degree that is. So, here's my thing. If you don't have that feeling in your gut, if you're not waking up at 2 a.m. every now and then, worried about something, wondering how things are going to work out, then you're not living outside of your comfort zone. There's doses of that are good. It doesn't need to be your entire life, but I just challenge everyone to kind of take inventory of where you're at right now and determine, are you living in that comfortable complacency zone? Y'all have a good week.
If you got 1% of value from this podcast, do us a favor. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Tell your friend, tell your coworker. Until we meet again. Lead one.